Hello everyone. Welcome to Scary Chronicles. I know you've come here to relax and fall asleep, so before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I thought it would be fun if you let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, get cozy, let your worries fade, and let's begin. Story number 1. I hate snow. Not in the way most people hate the inconvenience of shoveling their driveways or the sting of icy wind slicing through their scarves. Not in the way someone groans when their morning commute is slowed to a crawl or when their favorite shoes soak through, leaving their socks clammy and cold. No, my hatred runs deeper than that. Bone deep, marrow deep, settling into the cracks of my ribs like frost that never thaws. Most people love snow. They welcome it, yearn for it even. Their faces light up the moment the first flakes begin to fall, delicate as whispers, like the world itself is speaking some long-forgotten lullaby. Snow is magical to them, a crystalline promise of laughter, snowball fights, sledding, hot chocolate, and rosy cheeks. It's pure. It's soft. It blankets the world in an illusion of peace, quieting everything beneath its frozen touch. But snow lies. It's not pure. It's not soft. And it is anything but peaceful. To me, snow is heavy. It isn't weightless, isn't gentle. It presses down, smothering, relentless, a cold so thick it claws its way into your chest and stays there, pulsing with an icy rhythm. Snow buries. It doesn't blanket. It doesn't make things disappear. It preserves them, traps them beneath layers of frozen stillness where they cannot decay, cannot move, cannot breathe. The first snow came today. I knew it before I even opened my eyes. The air in the room was different, sharper. The faint light leaking through the curtains tinged with that sickly glow that only happens when snow coats the ground. For a moment, I let myself lie there in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart thudding slow and heavy in my chest. Then I made myself look. I pulled back the curtain with shaking fingers, the fabric colder than it had any right to be. And there it was. Soft white flakes tumbling lazily from the sky, spinning and spiraling as if mocking me with their innocence. The world outside was already coated in an untouched layer of white, the kind that children can't resist throwing themselves into, their laughter ringing out as they ruin the pristine surface with snow angels and footprints. I stood there, gripping the windowsill like it was the only thing tethering me to reality, staring at the scene beyond the glass. My neighbors' kids were already out there, their bright coats and hats clashing against the muted landscape. They shrieked and laughed, pushing each other down and flinging snow into the air like confetti. Their joy was tangible, infectious, but it didn't reach me. It never does. Because to me, snow isn't joy. It isn't innocence or magic or nostalgia. It's suffocating. It's drowning. Snow means death. It means him. I turned away from the window before the memories could claw their way up from where I'd buried them, shoving them back into the dark corners of my mind where they belonged. But it didn't matter. It never does. Snow has a way of dragging everything out of hiding, no matter how deep you've buried it. I hate snow, but I hate ice more. And skating. God, do I hate skating. My friends never understand why I always have an excuse ready when they ask me to join them at the rink. They think I'm clumsy or shy, that I don't want to embarrass myself by falling on the ice. They don't know that I haven't set foot on a frozen lake in years, not since that day. The day I let my brother die. You see, ice is like snow. It lies. It's cruel, deceptive, and it doesn't care about you. It doesn't care who you are or what you love. It will crack beneath your feet just the same. I used to love it, ice skating. I loved the way the air felt colder on the lake, sharper against my cheeks as my skates glided over the surface. I loved the sound of blades cutting through ice, the way it echoed into the winter air. It made me feel free, weightless, like I could outrun anything. Until I couldn't. Now, the thought of it sends a shiver crawling down my spine. Not the good kind, the kind that tightens your throat and pricks at your skin like needles. The kind that reminds you you're not free, not weightless. You're heavy. And no matter how far you run, you can't escape what's already inside you. I should have known better. I should have seen it coming. But I didn't. I replay it constantly, like a film strip spliced together wrong. Frames skipping, blurring, jerking back and forth. It's never the same. Not exactly. My memory twists and mutates, warping with every replay until I can't tell what's real and what my mind has stitched together in its endless, merciless looping. Sometimes I see his hand. Pale and trembling, his fingers claw at the underside of the ice, so close that I think I could touch them if I just reached out far enough. I watch them scrape and slip, leaving faint streaks on the frost-glazed surface before they vanish into the black water below. Other times, I see his face, distorted, ghost-like, a pale smudge beneath the icy veneer. His eyes are wide, wild, filled with terror that pierces straight into my soul. His mouth opens and closes in desperate, frantic motions, trying to scream, trying to speak. I can't hear him. The water swallows every sound, muting his cries, but I feel them. I feel the words clawing at my chest, pressing into me, suffocating me. Then there are the times when he's not there at all. In those memories, there's only the ice. That jagged, gaping hole, dark and endless, like a wound carved into the heart of winter itself. The water churns beneath it, cold and slick and alive, beckoning, calling. I stare at it for what feels like hours, waiting for him to resurface, waiting for his hand, his face, his scream, but nothing comes. Just the wind howling across the frozen expanse, the trees groaning under the weight of snow, and the deafening emptiness of a world without him in it. But the worst version, the one that haunts me long after I've forced my eyes open, gasping for air like I've been the one drowning, that's the version where I see myself. I'm on the shore, just standing there, watching. In that version, I don't run to the hole. I don't throw myself down to claw at the ice or scream his name until my throat tears. I don't even move. I'm just there, a dark, frozen silhouette, framed by the falling snow. My arms hang limp at my sides, my breath misting the air in shallow puffs, my shadow stretched long and strange against the unbroken whiteness behind me. He's sinking, and I'm standing. In that memory, I don't even try. Sometimes, I tell myself that version isn't real, that it's just my guilt playing tricks on me, warping what happened into something worse than it was. But other times I wonder. I wonder if my mind is trying to tell me something, trying to unravel the truth from the tangle of fear and grief and cold. What if that's what really happened? What if I didn't do anything? What if I stood there, paralyzed, while he slipped into the dark? I think about the cold, the way it seeps into your bones, slows your body down, turns your thoughts sluggish and heavy like wet cement. Maybe that's what it was. Shock, frostbite of the mind, freezing me in place. But no matter how many times I tell myself that, it doesn't feel like enough. Because the truth is, I don't remember moving. Not then. Not after. All I remember is the snow falling, silent and endless, erasing everything. And the hole in the ice, black and empty, waiting to swallow me whole. I was 17. Jake was 19. My older brother, my tormentor, my hero. He was everything I wasn't: brave, wild, reckless. Always daring, always laughing, always pushing me to keep up. Jake was the kind of guy everyone liked, the kind who could walk into a room and make it his without even trying. He didn't just live, he consumed life. I hated him for that, and I loved him for it too. That winter, the lake froze early. The frost clung to the windows like spiderwebs, the world outside suffocating beneath layers of white and silence. Jake had this idea, like he always did. Stupid and impulsive and impossible to say no to. He stumbled in late that night, drunk on cheap beer and adrenaline, his cheeks red from the cold, and grabbed my arm, dragging me off the couch where I was trying to ignore him. "Come on, Ethan," he slurred, his grin sharp, cutting. "Let's check out the lake. I bet it's solid as a rock." I told him no. At least, I think I did. The memory is hazy, fragmented, like an old photograph that's been torn and pieced back together wrong. Maybe I told him no, maybe I tried to fight him off, or maybe I didn't even bother. Saying no to Jake was like shouting into a storm. Pointless, exhausting. "Scaredy cat," he taunted, his voice sing-song, dragging out the words. "What's the worst that could happen, huh? You might actually grow a spine? Might actually have fun for once." He laughed when I didn't respond. That laugh, it always grated on me, needled at something deep inside. It made me feel small, insignificant, weak. I hated that laugh, but more than anything, I hated how much I cared about what he thought. So, I went. The lake was beautiful that night, the kind of beautiful that shouldn't exist. It was too still, too perfect. The moon hung high, cold and white, casting the ice in an unnatural glow. The stars reflected on its surface like a second sky, so clear and sharp they almost seemed more real than the one above. The air was so cold it felt alive, biting at my lungs, my face, my fingertips. Jake didn't care. He never cared. He stepped onto the ice first, his boots crunching faintly. I remember that sound. It echoes in my head sometimes, sharp, rhythmic, fading as he walked farther out. "See," he called, his voice carrying across the empty expanse. Solid as a rock. I hesitated at the edge, the tips of my boots just brushing the ice. The lake groaned beneath him, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from deep within its frozen heart. It wasn't a warning, not yet. Just a whisper, a murmur. "Come on, Ethan." Jake's voice echoed again, louder this time, more impatient. I didn't want to. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stay where I was, to turn around, to go back. But then I heard it. His voice in my head, the teasing, the ridicule, the words that had always cut deeper than they should have. So, I stepped forward. What happened after that? It's hard to say. I remember flashes, fragments, but when I try to hold on to them, they slip away, like trying to grab water with my bare hands. I think he was running, laughing, maybe. His boots skidding against the ice in wide, clumsy arcs. I can still see the grin on his face, that cocky, reckless grin that made you want to hit him and follow him all at once. Then, the sound. A crack. Sharp, sudden, splitting the air like a gunshot. I remember him freezing mid-step. His grin faltered, then vanished. His head snapped toward me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. "Jake," I think I said. Or maybe I screamed it. Maybe I didn't say anything at all. And then he was gone. The water swallowed him so fast, it didn't seem real. One moment, he was there, larger than life, and the next, he was nothing. Just a jagged hole in the ice, black and gaping. I know I moved. I must have. I think I dropped to my knees, crawling toward the hole, the ice groaning beneath me with every shift of my weight. I think I saw him beneath the surface, his arms thrashing, his face a pale, distorted smear in the dark water. But the details blur. Sometimes I remember reaching out, my fingers brushing the edge of the ice. I remember him looking at me, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing in frantic, soundless pleas. "Help me." Other times, I remember standing on the shore, watching from a safe distance, my feet frozen to the ground. I see myself, motionless, useless, a shadow against the snow. Which memory is real? I don't know. I can't know. My mind plays tricks on me, warps the truth into something unrecognizable. Maybe it's trying to protect me, or maybe it's punishing me. The only thing I know for sure is that he didn't come back. The ice closed over him, slow and deliberate, as if the lake was swallowing him whole. The silence after was suffocating, absolute. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking back. I don't even remember how I got home. But sometimes, in my dreams, I hear the ice cracking. I hear the water churning, the low, mournful groan of the lake as it claimed him. And I see him, just beneath the surface, his hand reaching for me, his eyes full of something I can't name. And I wonder, did I let him die? They never found his body. The police were baffled. They said it was the current, that the water had carried him too far beneath the ice to recover. They speculated that the thaw had broken up the surface enough to drag him deeper, far beyond where the ice had cracked. They called it a tragic accident, just another story of a winter gone wrong, of a moment of recklessness that cost a life. They said they'd search again when the weather warmed, but they never did. The search was called off after a few weeks. They chalked it up to bad luck. Nature, they said, had taken him. Nothing more, nothing less. No one ever questioned me. They didn't need to. I was the quiet brother. The one who stayed home, kept to himself. The one who wasn't as adventurous as Jake, who didn't chase thrills or take risks. The one who'd always been the good kid. The one who would never do anything wrong. No one doubted me. Why would they? I told them he fell. I told them I tried to save him but couldn't. I told them the ice had broken, and he went under too fast. That it happened in a blink, before I could do anything. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? The story was easy enough. It fit the narrative. A tragic accident. A lost life. The kind of thing that happens every year. Something no one can stop. People moved on quickly, as people do. They whispered their condolences, said things like, "I'm sorry for your loss," and left me alone with my guilt. But that's the thing about guilt. It has a way of settling inside you, of festering until it becomes something darker, something you can't shake off. I thought I would feel relief once it was over, once the search was done and the questions stopped coming. I thought that when they closed the case, I could let it go, pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. The truth is, I wanted him gone. I wanted him to drown. I wanted the world to stop spinning in his favor, for him to finally fall from that pedestal I'd never been able to reach. I wanted him to feel fear the way I had, deep, gut-wrenching fear. The kind of fear that makes you freeze, makes you stand still when everything inside you is screaming at you to act. But I didn't act. I don't even know if I could have. Maybe the truth is I froze, just like I had when I saw him slipping beneath the ice. But the truth feels too ugly to admit, too raw to bear. I try to push it away, bury it deep under layers of time and distance, but it's always there. Always hovering at the edges of my thoughts, crawling beneath the surface like something that won't stay dead. I didn't jump in after him. I didn't try to save him. I don't recall making the decision. I don't remember consciously choosing to stand back. It just happened. But then I remember his face. The way his eyes locked onto mine, wide with panic. I see it so clearly now. How desperate he looked. How his hands reached for me like he thought I could help him. How I stood there, watching, as he sank deeper, as the light in his eyes faded. I still wonder if he knew. If he realized that I could have done something, that I could have saved him if I had just reached out. Did he see it in my eyes too? Did he see that I wasn't going to try? I didn't want to be the weak one. Not with him. Not with anyone. And I told myself over and over that it was out of my hands. That it was the ice, the water, the current. That there was nothing I could have done. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when I'm alone and the house is silent, I hear his voice again. Low, muffled, distant. Help me. I can't tell if it's something I actually heard, or if it's just the echo of my own guilt twisting my thoughts, making me believe I can still hear him. But it doesn't matter. The damage is done. The weight is there, and I can't shake it off. I didn't tell anyone the truth. No one will ever know what really happened that night. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe I'd rather live with the lie than face the reality of it. Sometimes I think I see him. Not in the way you'd expect. Not as some ghost that drifts through walls or lingers in the corners of rooms. No, it's more subtle than that. It's in the way the shadows move when I'm alone. In the flicker of light that catches the surface of the ice just right, making it look like something is shifting beneath it. Sometimes it's in the cracks, the way the ice seems to fracture and break under its own weight, like it's holding onto something just below the surface. And other times, it's in the spaces between the snowflakes, like his presence is woven into every flake that falls from the sky. I can't escape him. There's a mirror in the hallway that I can't stand to look at. I avoid it at all costs, but sometimes I pass by it on my way to the kitchen, or when I'm too lost in my own thoughts. Every time I do, I see him instead of me. I see him there in the glass, his face pale and distorted, his eyes wide and glassy, like the last image he must have seen before he sank beneath the water. It's not the face I remember. It's something else, warped, twisted, like the ice itself had stretched his features into something unrecognizable. His reflection haunts me. It's not the way he was before, laughing, alive, full of life. No, it's the way he must have looked in those final moments, when he realized it was too late. The way his eyes must have searched mine, looking for help that never came. The way his fingers must have scraped against the ice, desperately trying to hold on. He's always watching, always waiting. His eyes are cold now, empty. Like the lake that took him, like the dark water that swallowed him whole. There are nights when I wake up, shivering, and I feel it. His gaze, heavy and unrelenting, staring at me from the dark. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the weight of it, pressing down on me, suffocating me. And sometimes, I swear he speaks to me. Not in words, not in the way people do, but in other ways. In whispers, in the creak of the ice as it shifts beneath the weight of time, in the howl of the wind that screams through the trees. It's always the same name. My name. Sometimes, I hear it clearly, like a breath against my ear, soft and slow. Other times, it's faint, a murmur on the edge of my mind, just out of reach. But it's always there, always calling me, asking me why. Why didn't I help him? Why did I just stand there? Why didn't I jump in after him? I never answer. I can't, because I know the truth, and so does he. He knows what I did, what I didn't do. I can feel it in the silence, in the air, in the cold. He knows I let him die, and now he's here. Always here, watching, waiting, reminding me. Sometimes I think that if I could just apologize, if I could just say the words, maybe it would stop. Maybe he would leave me alone. Maybe I could go back to being normal, back to the way things were before the lake, before the ice. But I can't. I can't say the words, because I don't deserve forgiveness. I never did. He knows it too. The truth hangs between us like the frozen air before a storm. Heavy, thick, suffocating. It's there in every whisper, in every gust of wind that rattles the windows. It's in the snow that falls endless and cold, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for me to face what I've done. And every time I look in the mirror, every time I feel the chill in the air, I know he'll never stop haunting me. He'll never stop asking why. Because it wasn't the ice that took him. It wasn't the water. It was me. I never left. Not really. I thought I could bury it all, hide it under the snow, pretend it was a memory that could fade with time. But the truth is, I never stopped watching him sink. I never stopped letting him drown. Now, I feel him everywhere. In the falling snow, in the cold spaces between the silence, in the shadows that stretch too long in the dark. Always there, always waiting. Watching me, waiting for me to sink just like he did. And one day, when the ice cracks open again, I won't be able to run. Because it wasn't just his life that was taken that night. It was mine too. And now, I belong to the lake. Story number 2. I thought missing my dad's funeral was the worst-case scenario. I was wrong. Long drives have a hypnotic effect on you, the passing broken white lines like a swaying pocket watch from some shady hypnotist telling you to sleep. Not to mention with the thoughts of your father's body mangled in a hospital bed flashing in and out of your mind, it's safe to say the 15-hour drive from Stony Rapids to Regina felt like years. On my first day driving, around 8 p.m., I had been on the road for 7 straight hours, only stopping once to pee and fill up on gas and snacks. I honestly was not in a good state to drive. Almost no sleep and intermittent periods of intense pain and anxiety that the flat Saskatchewan landscape turned into green oil paintings through my welling tears. Safe to say, when I thought I heard a whisper over the radio, I brushed it off immediately as just me hearing things through my delirium. Just 30 kilometers from my hotel, I heard it again. This time I could almost make out a single word. Fall. I quickly look around me. Going 110, I do my best to look behind me and all over the car the best I can without swerving into a ditch. Once again, I chalk it up to my exhausted mind playing tricks on me while in the isolation of my car on a dead road near the middle of the night. But I decided to drive the rest of the way in without any radio just in case. Just 2 kilometers outside of the town of Laurentidia where I booked my hotel, I heard it again. It's not your fault, I heard in a whisper so quiet that even without the radio I almost missed it. I immediately jerked my head to my back seat, and through the darkness I swear I saw something just fall behind my back seats and into my trunk. I could not make out any sort of figure, but the worst part was the noise. The sound I heard when it jumped in the back was like the scurry of 1,000 rats, as if whatever this thing was had hundreds of legs on all sides of its body moving in unison to stay out of my sight. I immediately pulled over and got out, the cold wind of the night shocking my system as I disrupted my warm hideaway provided by the car's heater. Call me crazy. Call me a pussy, I don't care. I'm exhausted and mentally shot, so if I'm not just imagining things, I want absolutely nothing to do with whatever the hell that was. I'm only a couple kilometers away from my hotel. I'll just walk, go get some rest, and come back to my car when I have a clearer head in the morning. So I quickly grab all my valuables out of the front seats, lock the doors, and write down the location of my car and start walking. I get about half a kilometer down the road when I look back, and my car is the same distance behind me as it was when I left. Not like I am in the same spot. I did move up the road, but it's like my car was tied to me with some imaginary string keeping it at the same distance. The engine was not on, I had the keys in my pocket, the doors were locked. It's strange what your mind remembers in moments of terror. I remember looking both ways down the road, as if to confirm I wasn't the only one seeing this. I was. This isn't my imagination playing tricks on me anymore. This isn't explainable. No one else is on the road at this time, and I am all alone with a possessed Chevy Equinox. I stood there for what might have been minutes just looking at my vehicle, not moving, not started, just sitting there staring back at me, waiting to start walking like a dog looking at its owner before going on a walk. Finally, I see headlights in the distance heading towards me. I'm snapped back into reality, and without conscious thought I put my hands up to try and wave down the passing truck. Not surprisingly, a guy flailing his arms around at you on the highway at 1 in the morning isn't exactly a situation most people would feel hospitable in. He just drove by. That didn't overly shock me, but what made my bones tense in fear was what I saw in my car as he drove past. In my back seat, the headlights flashed the silhouette of a massive black mass of fleshy tendrils sloshing around like a puddle of sentient intestines. After about 10 seconds of paralyzing fear, bugs buzzing past my face, with the light passing truck still imprinting hot white dots in my eyes, I did the only thing my mind could think of. I ran. Never looking back. That thing could have my car. I don't care anymore. I ran and ran and ran until finally I got to the hotel, running past several other cars in the parking lot over to the check-in desk on the far southern side of the parking lot, with the hotel to the north, only illuminated by the 3 streetlights above the parking lot and the spattered lights of occupied hotel rooms. The sight of the lights in the checkout office gave me a feeling of relief sailors must feel after seeing the shine of a lighthouse after clearing a severe storm. I ran up the check-in office and, bursting through the front door, nearly giving the clerk at the front desk a heart attack. The clerk was a 20-something kid with long blonde hair with headphones in and a Dead Kennedys t-shirt on. "You good bro?" he said, taking out one of his AirPods. "Check in for McNeil," I said through my heavy breathing, slamming my ID on the desk. "I'm okay," the clerk responded, looking around as if he wasn't sure I was just some hallucination from the drugs he was obviously on. "Room 4E, just up the stairs to the north and down the hall," he said after an agonizing 20 seconds of him looking at the computer and before handing me the keys. I grab the keys, and as I turn around and walk out to the stairs outside, I look out at the parking lot and see a white Chevy just sitting directly in the middle of the parking lot. There were a few other cars in the parking lot. I only saw it from the side, so I wasn't certain it was mine. I was exhausted. I could barely see straight. I had just ran for 20 minutes straight, and I had experienced something I couldn't even explain with a clear mind. I had no plan, but for whatever reason I began to walk towards the car to check the license plate and confirm it was mine. It was. I walked up towards the side of the vehicle, and as I made my way to the back, I saw the whole thing shift side to side, as if whatever this thing was staring at me, following me completely by rotating its entire body to face me. I could see its jet-black slimy tendrils illuminated by the street light further down the parking lot, slinking forever forward as if it had no end. Its disgusting form faces me like an unholy abomination that defies all logic, looking at me, destroying my concept of biology and reality just by existing. My mind became a blur. Everything that had happened to me over the last few days hit me all at once like a runaway train. I was overcome with emotions, and my knees buckled. I was now on my knees in the middle of the parking lot, that thing looking over me as if I was bowing to its command. Just then I was startled out of my trance by the front desk clerk suddenly appearing in front of me, giving me a look of concern with his headphones in his hand, though I could still hear the heavy metal instrumentals blaring through them. It seems my existential crisis in the parking lot looked like something he should probably deal with from his desk window. "Hey man, do you need me to call someone for you?" he said sincerely. I looked up at him and somehow felt a moment of comfort. This kid seemed genuinely concerned for me. Maybe he'll understand. Maybe if I explain to him what is happening, we can figure a way out of this situation together. Just as I had this thought and opened my mouth to speak, I noticed the door to my trunk behind him opened slightly. "Look, oh you." Before I could even finish the two words, the creature in my backseat had slipped one of its hellish tentacles out of the back and slit the clerk's throat from ear to ear before slowly slipping back into the trunk of my car, using it as some sort of protective shell. I'll never forget the face he made. The look of concern was replaced with shock and terror in the blink of an eye. Blood spurting out of his now open carotid artery with the rhythm of his slowly dying heartbeat. I just sat there on my knees, the brief second of hope I had dying as quickly as he did. As the kid fell to the floor, blood pooling like a lake, I still sat there motionless. Some desperate part of me wanted this to still be a dream or some fucked up hallucination brought on by grief-induced exhaustion. As much as I tried to wake up or confirm to myself this wasn't reality, the kid's lifeless body still lay in front of me, growing whiter and whiter with every passing second. Just as my reality was once again collapsing, my driver's side door opened. "They are gonna blame you for this, you know." A high-pitched voice whispered in my ear as if right behind me. "No, they won't. You did this." "Not me," I shouted back. As a result of my shouting, several of the occupants of the hotel rooms around me turned on their lights, some looking through the drapes at the commotion. "You think they'll believe you?" it responded, seemingly genuinely curious of my response. I didn't say anything. They wouldn't believe me. I looked around the parking lot. There were no cameras, several people watching now. All the police would see is a man going through mental anguish and a kid with his throat slit in the middle of nowhere. "Just drive to the police station. I'll be in the back seat. You can show them firsthand you're not crazy and you didn't do this," it whispered. I was now rocking back and forth in complete hysteria. I don't know if I was mentally shot or I had subconsciously completely given up at this point, but I began to consider it. Realistically, it was right. What options did I have? Either I could get in the car and probably be killed, or I could go to the police alone and try to explain myself and be disowned from my family and locked away in a mental institution or prison for the rest of my life. No matter what, my life was over. I couldn't live with the guilt that I had inadvertently led this kid to a gruesome death. I had to tell someone I couldn't live this way. Either I come clean or I die, and both options seemed equally dreadful. So against all of my body screaming at me to stop, I got in my car. I almost felt a fraction of a second of comfort as I remembered the warmth on my heater still trapped inside. Once I sat down and closed the door, I felt a sort of stomach-dropping regret I can't even describe to this day. "It's not your fault," it whispered. "I know it's not. You killed him. You killed me," I responded in a low, aggressive but broken tone. "Let's go talk to the police. Let's figure this whole mess out," it said after some silence. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed to the police station on the other side of the town, a short 5-minute drive away. "You're special, you know. He gave me you. Of all people he could have chosen, he chose you," it said just a minute into the longest drive of my life. I didn't want to respond. Whatever the hell was happening was something beyond my understanding. But eventually I realized if I was going down, I might as well know why. "Who?" I responded. "Your father," it whispered. I slammed on the brakes and looked in the rear view mirror. Just in the moment it occurred to me how large this thing was. It tensed in fear like a child about to be scolded by their parents. Even in its tense state, it still took up the entirety of the back of my car. I couldn't see a sliver of my rear view window. Just the sight of it made my stomach turn in with dread. "Don't you ever talk about my father. He would never let you do this to me, you son of a bitch," I screamed through my tears that seemingly had no end. "Oh, I'm sorry. Your father did want to protect you. On his deathbed after the accident, he prayed for your protection. I just think he didn't realize who he was praying to," it responded. I slumped in my chair. What was left of my sanity was now gone. I looked out my driver's side window and into the inky black void that was my surroundings. Only light coming from my headlights and the street light a kilometer down the road. Without another word, I shifted the car back into gear and started driving again. "I think you'll learn to appreciate me after a while. It was your dad's wish for me to look over you after all. It continued, whispering and whispering, never shutting up until I would completely collapse and fall apart at the seams. I turned onto the road the police station was on, a long road with a dense forest on my right with thick spruce trees all along the road. Nearing the end of the road close to the station, I noticed an extremely thick tree at the end of the road. If this thing was right, and I'm destined to be watched over by this thing from some sick bastardization of my father's final wishes, then I wasn't giving it the satisfaction of having me for long. My foot slowly pushes the gas pedal. As my car gets faster and faster, I unbuckle my seat belt. I wanted to make a prayer for my family in these brief seconds, but I didn't know what could be listening, so I simply let the trees rush past as I reached 120 kilometers per hour. As I was just 300 or so feet away from my fate, it spoke one last time. It's not your fault. Story number 3. Never get a hole-in-one at a mini golf course. Trust me, the risk is not worth the fleeting sense of accomplishment. Let's be real. You probably got one on accident, anyway, so any pride you'd feel is underserved. At Putthead's Mini Golf and Arcade, getting a hole-in-one on the 18th hole earned you a free game. It was a gimmick that everyone tried for. Even if your family was completely sick of the looping kiddie music playing over the rusted speakers and everyone was infighting by the end, they still tried for the hole-in-one. Free is free. When I was a kid, I got a hole-in-one at the local mini golf course. I felt like a celebrity when one of the barely there staffers rang a bell and everyone gave light, forced applause. Obviously, I had only swung randomly. As it just so happens, what amounted to nothing more than a sugar-fueled arm spasm turned out to be the perfect shot. The next time I did it, I was drunk. That evening, my scrubby friends and I couldn't think of anything more interesting to do than make an embarrassing scene at the local mini course. I lined up the shot, taking way too long, readjusted my position over and over again as the players behind our group look on in annoyance. With a completely overzealous swing, I sent the ball clacking off of wood and metal, sure it would hit someone in the face. The bell rang, very sparse clapping sounded, and when I checked, I found the ball in the hole. I was as shocked as anyone else. I was with some of those same friends when we heard not really that tragic news. After decades of operation, Puttheads was closing down for good. Items belonging to the course would be put up for auction. Everything from the clubs, to the arcade machines, to the giant plywood and fiberglass obstacles that stood between innocent children and the most meaningless form of success. The owner had declared bankruptcy, citing poor attendance due to lockdowns, rising gas prices, a generation addicted to staying indoors and playing video games, you name it. Everything but the fact that nobody in their right mind cares about playing mini-golf anymore. Speaking of people not in their right mind, my friends, I decided to visit the park a final time, mainly because it would make for interesting social media posts. We also considered chipping in to buy an arcade cabinet, but a mild disagreement broke out regarding whose place it would stay at, so that was dropped pretty quickly. A couple days later, 5 of us were packed into my car and ready to enjoy our first completely sober evening of partaking in a children's park. There's a story about a playground and something untoward happening on the roundabout, but I'm not repeating it here. I was driving, with Kate in the passenger's seat. Aaron, John, and Lissa were shoulder to shoulder in the back seat. I would have expected Lissa to be complaining the most about it, since she had self-inflicted Karen reputation. But oddly enough, John was the only one going on and on about how stuffy it was sitting in the middle, and how uncomfortable he was with his knees almost to his chest. I half expected him to start asking, "Are we there yet?" every 5 minutes. Eventually, almost as if they were jealous of the negative attention John was getting, Kate and Lissa started arguing over the radio station, and whether to listen to 107.5 or 105.5. Kate's position was that 107.5 ran too many commercials, while Lissa insisted that the DJ on 105.5 was so annoying that he could literally go die. Any tension was immediately dispersed and devolved into uncontrollable laughter as we pulled up to the weathered, half-condemned gates of the mini-golf course, and Aaron began loudly and violently singing the Jurassic Park theme to drown everyone out. A large, billboard-sized sign over the main building read, "Putthead's Mini Golf Course and Arcade," in bold writing, with the park's motto in italics just underneath. "We have a ball here." It was all way too wordy. A cartoonish course mascot, the titular Putthead, stood next to the words, giving an enthusiastic thumbs up. Looking at the sun-bleached and peeling sign with fresh eyes, I couldn't help but think of how much Putthead's head reminded me of a skull. The oversized, dimpled golf ball had no features other than two cartoony eyes of pure black. Any artist with a shit would have added a friendly smile, at the very least. "No one else is here?" Kate asked as we rolled to a stop in a parking spot. Almost like that's the reason it's closing," Lissa sarcastically added. As we spilled out of the car, John groaned and stretched his legs. Being the tall seemed to have its disadvantages. "I call shotgun for the trip back," John immediately added, as if he'd been planning it the whole way down. Kate shot me a look, as if to say she simply knew I would never consider such a request, but I just shrugged back. The dude was built like a street lamp. Denying him the footroom again would probably be inhumane. Kate and I had only recently started dating. We met through mutual friends, which is a nice way of saying we were both dating other people at the time, and hooked up before either of us had broken up with them. It was a huge mess, but we were just starting to come out the other side of it. As we moved to the little booth at the start of the course, Aaron was the first to inform everyone that it was unstaffed. More specifically, he said, "If no one shows up in 15 minutes, it's free." I would have been all for waiting until someone showed up, and I know Kate and John would have as well. Still, the line of 5 different colored golf balls was definitely tempting. After Aaron leaned over the small wooden counter and pulled out a few putters, it seemed like there was no real point in protesting the inevitable. Lissa immediately moving to grab the purple golf ball also set the others to picking their own favorite colors before someone else did. Hanging out with this group, I'd occasionally catch myself thinking that there's no such thing as an adult, just taller and louder children. I hung back a bit and looked around for any sign of employees on their way to the booth. Then I picked up the last ball, an orange one. Luckily, my own favorite. Probably because I was an illogically huge fan of Garfield as a kid, despite never once laughing at his comics, cartoons, or movies. Aaron was already teed up for the first hole, a standard and straightforward length of dingy green lined with old red bricks on either side. "Nothing but hole, baby," Aaron smugly predicted as he lined up his putter carefully. "Stop." A sharp, tinny voice rang out from the speakers on poles overhead. I didn't realize there was no music playing until that moment. The voice echoed a bit, followed by the squawking of far-off birds, startled by the noise. In one smooth motion, Aaron picked his ball back up, pocketed it, and, in attempting to appear innocent, managed to carry himself like the most obviously guilty man to ever live. "Busted." Lissa smirked. She turned around in place, again looking for any employees, before pointing to Aaron with the handle of her putter. "He's the one who didn't want to wait." We could hear a high-pitched, motorized whirring sound from behind a storage shed. Before long, we could see the small golf cart haphazardly buzzing out way as it bumped and jostled over rocks and debris. The cart was open, with no roof, to accommodate the driver. Putthead himself, or at least a random dude wearing Putthead's giant fake ball of a head. "Oh," John said in relieved realization, followed by a longer, more drawn-out "oh," as he realized just how annoying the mascot was likely about to become. "What the fuck?" Kate stated in an eerily calm voice as the cart came to a stop beside the green. Now. This is a family park," Putthead chided as he got to his feet. His voice was muffled by the mascot head, making it a struggle to interpret a few of his words. He was wearing all black, including a long black coat and black leather gloves. A definite departure from his usual colorful, outlandish golfer's outfit. Kate covered her mouth instinctively, as if it wasn't entirely too late to block the F word. "Here's a little trick I like to use," Putthead continued as he leaned over a golf bag on the back of the cart. "I like to replace profanities with the word putt. It helps me get through the longer shifts without scarring the kids for life." Putthead pulled a putter out of his golf bag, studied it, looked down the handle carefully, turned it over in his hands, slowly felt along its face, then put it back in the back. He then drew out another putter, judged that just as thoroughly before again placing that one back inside. He took out another putter. His bag was full of putters. So, for example, Putthead took a white golf ball and teed it. Instead of fuck, I say putt. Instead of shit, I say putt. Instead of bitch, I say putt. Instead of dash. You stole that from the Smurfs. Aaron interrupted in a typical smarmy, yet chill tone. Putthead tapped the ball, sending it perfectly straight down the green, and right into the hole. "How about that? A hole in one," he mused to himself. I gave Kate a side eye, and could see she was visibly upset by the stranger who had now insinuated himself into our friend group without so much as introducing himself. I suppose he figured his reputation preceded him, given the sign and all. Listen, this is kind of a friend thing, I started. How about you listen? Putthead replied, cutting me off. He put his putter back in the bag and leaning one-handed against the cart. I got a hole in one. So see if you can, too. Match my score. This is marked as a par 3, but that's really just to make the less coordinated kids feel competent for a day. I'm totally sure you can do it in one. Or we could just pay you at the booth and you can go back to work behind that shed, or whatever was going on over there. I counter-offered. Putthead sat on the golf cart with a thud, put his hand to his gigantic, featureless golf ball chin, and thought for a moment. Nah, he waved my offer away dismissively. Match me. Hole in one for hole in one. The cart let out a few irritating beeps as he backed it up, then swung around to face it toward the next hole. Or I'll pudding kill you, he added in carefree tone, the twin black recesses of his eye holes staring blankly at us all. John and Aaron defiantly dropped their putters and golf balls to the ground, and almost immediately after, the rest of us did the same. See ya, bro. John laughed mockingly as the 5 of us turned out our heels and left. The end. Well, in a perfect world, it would be. When we got back to the parking lot, it was readily apparent that there was a small hitch in our plan to leave in and never think about that place again. The gates were locked. I don't just mean locked, I mean locked. Multiple chains, multiple locks. A comedically unnecessary amount of chains and locks. 3 key locks, 2 combination locks, and a bike lock thrown into the mix for some reason. A standing sign rested on the pavement just outside, reading, closed, permanently out of business. We have to ram the gate, John said. Just ram it with the car. What car? Lissa asked. The parking lot was empty. The weirdo must have broken into my car, hotwired it, and driven it out before locking the gate. I couldn't figure out how he pulled it off in such a short time, only to show up somewhere completely different later on. A cliched chill ran up my spine and out through my limbs, raising the hairs on my arms. Lissa took out her phone and began to dial 911. Smack. A golf ball flying at a reckless speed knocked the phone straight out of her hand. The phone hit the pavement and skipped a few times, like a stone on a lake. What the F-U-C-K? Lissa shouted. We turned to see Putthead some distance away, lowering his putter as if he had just taken one hell of a swing. He cupped one hand to the side of where his mouth would be and called back to us. Language. It's a family park. That's it. I'm fucking him up, John said definitively. He took a few bold, angry steps toward the less-than-whimsical character. In one smooth motion, Putthead dropped a golf ball and took another giant swing. Smack. John instantly doubled over as the ball hit him in the windpipe. Putthead called over again. What did you expect to happen? Kate rushed to make sure John could breathe as he choked and sucked in long, labored breaths. Aaron got him to his feet, hit him on the back several times, as if that would help. He isn't choking, Kate snapped. Oh. I thought it landed in his mouth. Aaron replied apologetically. We searched the fence line for as long as we could, with Putthead following in the background the entire way. The place was a fortress of chain-link fencing and barbed wire. Entirely too much security for what was worth stealing. John was still wheezing as we plodded through the overgrown weeds, but to no avail. It was getting late, a fact that was literally highlighted by the park's evening lights slowly brightening to counteract the darkness. It's one hole, Aaron finally pointed out, and it's also hole 1. How hard, John said, panting, can it be? Putthead was already waiting for us when we got back to the spot where our discarded putters were still lying in a heap. He was closer now, but was smart enough to stay out of punching range. Okay, here we go. Whatever. Lissa placed her purple ball on the tee and carelessly swacked it off the path and into the grass. I did it. Are you happy? Ooh. Putthead hissed between his unseen teeth. You needed to get a hole in one, remember? It's not what we agreed on. We didn't agree on anything, I insisted. You literally are just holding us hostage. Fine, I'll go again. Lissa huffed, stepping off the green and into the tall grass to find her ball. "Ma'am, I don't think you know how golf works," Putt-Head called after her. The lights throughout the entire park flickered. Lissa looked back at the group, a worried expression on her face. "I can't find my dad." Suddenly, she was gone, pulled down into the grass at double speed, like as she'd been pulled underwater by a shark. "Lissa," Erin called out. The rest of us followed suit, calling her name and asking if she was all right. Within seconds, we all moved to rush toward the grass, but as we did, we were met with an even more horrifying sight. Lissa crawled quickly from the grass line, sheer horror in her eyes. She let out a gut-wrenching scream as a flurry of small hands reached from behind the foliage and snagged her hair and clothing before pulling her quickly back into the darkness of the unkempt grounds. "Oh shit!" John shouted, finding his breath again. Unlike the rest of us, he continued to rush forward, to pull Lissa out of the grip of whatever had her. Instead, he once again fell to the ground as his feet were tripped up with a putter. "I wouldn't," Putt-Head said as he untangled his putter from between John's ankles and shook his massive head disapprovingly. "There's no point now. She's already with them." "Them?" Kate screamed, incredulously. "Them who? What the hell was that?" "Oh, it's some ghosts," Putt-Head explained casually, taking Erin's green ball from his trembling hand and teeing it up for him. Ghosts of children who died on the grounds of Putt-Head's mini-golf course and arcade. How many kids die playing mini-golf, dude? As usual, Erin was thinking ahead of us all. "You would be shocked," Putt-Head replied, absolutely shocked. "She's with them," I demanded, my voice cracking as my throat stung from an acrid mix of anger and fear. "Where?" Putt-Head shrugged. "I dunno. Do I look like an expert on dead children?" Erin took a few wobbly steps to the tee, then took in some deep breaths and found his calm. Putt-Head observed, absently twirling his putter between his hands like a martial arts expert spinning a ceremonial sword. "Kids do this every day," Erin said quietly. "You're better than some dumb kid. Smarter. Bigger. Come on, AA, you got this." We watched in complete silence as the ball rolled almost hesitantly toward the cup. It was a straight line. Near perfect. Erin exploded into a relieved cheer as the ball dropped into the hole. He pumped his fist in the air a few times and jumped in place. Then, he turned back to the rest of us. "I am so sorry if you die," he said, genuinely. I stepped up next. I wasn't great at golfing, but I wasn't that bad at it, either. "All right. A hole-in-one should be really easy for you." Putt-Head nodded. As I lined up the shot, he added something that froze me in place. "After all, you've done it twice before. How would he know that?" I swallowed hard and convinced myself that my chances of making the shot weren't getting any better the longer I waited. Hole-in-one. Erin cheered again, but I just felt my shoulders slump and my knees start to give out from under me. The stress, the exhaustion after searching the property, and the dread of whatever awful fate had taken Lissa weighed heavy on me. When I looked back at Kate, I could see she was even more shaken than I was. She had a 1,000-yard stare. Her already pale skin had gone stark white. "Can I shoot for her?" I turned back to Putt-Head, who was patiently waiting for us to get our shit together. "I'll take her turn. In her place, I mean." Putt-Head gave a bitter chuckle and shook his head disapprovingly. Kate's hands were cold when I took them in mine and helped her line up the shot. It wasn't so much that I didn't trust her to make it on her own, but I knew she'd have a much better chance with my guidance. But the ball bounced off the back border, drawing a gasp from everyone. Then, thankfully, it rebounded into the cup. John was the last to take his turn, and after suffering 2 sudden faceplants in one night, he definitely needed the extra time to get ready. As he walked up to the tee and set his red ball down, he shot me cold glance. That split-second look spoke volumes. If no one else had the metaphorical balls to do anything, he would. Wham! In a flash, John had struck Putt-Head with his club, closing the distance with his long reach and the aid of the putter's full length. The resounding smack of metal on ball face jarred Kate awake. "Get him," she muttered. Surprised at myself, I was in full agreement. John struck the usually stoic mascot again and again, creating spider webs of cracks along the head's surface. When Putt-Head stopped reeling backward and finally fell to the ground, John brought the head of the club down on his ribs. The fury and finality of every swing brought to mind a missing link pummeling long-dead prey. Putt-Head's limp body flopped like a rag doll with each blow. As a final touch, John jammed the club into one of the large, dark eye sockets. Nonsensically enough, blood sprayed like a geyser from the fake eye hole, drenching John. I expected Aaron to let out another cheer, but he was silent. I cleared my throat. That was kind of much. But I definitely think it had to be done. John was panting again, mixed with a smattering of self-contented laughs. Let's just call the cops and get the hell out of here now, Kate noted, bringing some sense to the spectacle. Aaron took out his phone and began dialing. Smack. Yet another stray ball obliterated his phone, splintering the plastic casing in midair. Language, please, a familiar voice shouted. From behind the storage shed, Putt-Head rode up on a second golf cart, buzzed right up next to the previous one, and hopped out as if he didn't have a care in the world. He walked over to John, and to the lifeless copy of himself that lay on the ground between John's feet. I know what you're thinking, Putt-Head said as he pulled the blood-soaked putter from the duplicates. I like King Arthur retrieving Excalibur. Isn't dropping a second ball on the green cheating? John was flabbergasted. His face bunched up as if he wanted to ask 100 questions, but couldn't get a single one of them to come out. Putt-Head looked over to John's ball. He had kicked it when he rushed to take action. Now, it sat halfway down the green. It happened so quickly that the old phrase held true. If you blinked, you would have missed it. With one swing of the club, Putt-Head shattered John's skull. His large form toppled to the ground in what seemed, comparatively, like slow motion. Kate screamed. Aaron screamed. I screamed. We all screamed, but there wasn't a single scoop of ice cream in sight. All right. Putt-Head cheerily replaced the putter with another from his bag. On to hole 2. Hole 2. I hadn't even considered the idea that our ludicrous torturer wanted to play all 18 holes this way. There was no way any of us could make every single hole in one shot, and it was obvious that, despite all logic, he definitely could. The three of us, the three left alive, hesitantly followed Putt-Head to the next hole as he whistled to himself. I couldn't quite place the tune for a moment, until it dawned on me that he was whistling the theme from his own commercials. The second hole was the park's first introduction of an actual obstacle. A large, wooden cuckoo clock, standing on fiberglass bird legs with a large pendulum perpetually swinging back and forth between the feet. Usually, it was simple enough to get the ball past the easily predictable moving blockade. However, something had changed since the last time I'd been here. The pendulum itself was swinging faster, and it was encircled by incredibly sharp-looking blades. Meanwhile, the hands on the face of the clock spin in opposite directions, stopping and changing course randomly. I don't like this, Aaron mumbled as we watched Putt-Head tee up and smack his ball straight through the obstacle and directly into the cup. How are you just saying that now? Kate snapped. She had moved from stunned disbelief to anger. Where have been all this time? Putt-Head stood proudly at the tee and waited for the next contestant to step forward. When it was obvious none of us were volunteering, he let out a sigh and closed the distance between us. Eagle. He tapped me on the top of the head with his club. Birdie. He tapped Kate on the head. Bogey. Aaron was obviously next in line. He swung back quickly and bopped me again. Ace. He proceeded to knock on each of our skulls in order as he continued. Smack a golfer in the face. If he stumbles, give him space. Eagle, birdie, bogey, ace. His words quickened. My caddy told me to pick the very worst one in URIT. Aaron. Hey, I'm not the worst one. Aaron immediately protested, before looking at me, then to Kate. Okay, well, maybe I'm the worst one here, but not in general. I'm not sure if we had any real choice at that point, but we were sure acting like we didn't. Aaron stepped up to the tee, almost as if he were as automated as the clock looking over us. There was no way we could complete this insane challenge, but trying was better than losing by default and being massacred in some disturbing way. Eye on the ball, Aaron said, not the giant douchebag ball who sucks ass and that I hate, but the tiny green one. Aaron carefully tapped the ball, sending it down the green. For all intents and purposes, it looked like another perfect shot made under extreme pressure. Fact. The pendulum cut the ball in half, sending 2 equal portions of golf ball rolling off to either side of the cup. The symmetrical nature of each half rolling directly past the goal was insulting. Aaron turned to me and Kate, his limbs and his neck as stiff as stone, clearly tense and frozen from abject terror. "It's been an honor, dudes." Bong. The cuckoo clock rang out. The wood panel covering a small window at the top burst in a hail of splinters as a frazzled old cuckoo bird prop erupted out on an oversized spring. "Kuh!" the broken thing shrilly exclaimed in a mechanical voice. I only had time to draw in a scream's worth of breath as the bird's beak skewed Aaron's back, the tip of the yellow-painted cone peeking out at us from between his ribs. Aaron's eyes widened and his expression immediately dropped. It looked as if he was about to pass right out on his feet. The spring retracted, carrying the bird and Aaron back in through the wooden door, folding his body forward as he disappeared inside. Talk about a dash, Putt Head started. "Fuck you," Kate interrupted, throwing her blue ball at him. He turned to her slowly, then leaned on his putter like a cane. "You know, I've reminded you about the profanity a couple times now, and I get the feeling you haven't been paying proper attention." "Shut up, Kate," I whispered, loudly. "The last thing you want to do is piss this thing off." Kate shot me a cold look. "At least John did something," she said, fully intending for it to hurt. "Guess who's next?" Putt Head said, tapping Kate's ball back over, bouncing it directly onto the tee. Kate moved up to the ball. "Wait, let me help," I insisted, taking a step toward her. "I can do it myself," Kate growled, putting the ball hard without a second thought. The ball zipped forward, under the clock, past the pendulum, and solidly into the cup with an audible plunk. At that point, it dawned on me that Kate was probably regretting leaving her ex for me, and immediately after that, I realized it wasn't very likely that this was the first time she was thinking it. Part of me wanted to call it a lucky shot. Maybe that's what Putt Head wanted. If not to just kill us, then to drive apart whoever survived through the extreme pressure of the competition. I made the shot again. I'll save you another tense description of walking, lining up, and putting. It should be obvious by now, since I'm here to say this. Yeah, it's no mystery that I'm not currently a corpse. The how and why, though, might be worth sticking around. Hole 3 was a twist. In literal terms, the green curved twice, with sand traps in the bends, and a small Egyptian pyramid over the hole. Putt Head took his shot, bouncing the ball off of the brick border once, then twice, before it rolled into the cup. Of course. With no further hesitation, I stepped up next. Bounce, bounce, hole in one. "It's all you," I said to Kate as I walked back from the tee. I had no anger or hatred toward her. I felt more of a hopeless acceptance of the fact that she didn't want my help, likely didn't want me around at all right then, and would take her own shot no matter how much I insisted otherwise. Just as carelessly as before, she swung, sending the ball into the sand right away. Kate dropped her putter, clearly surprised she had not only missed, but had missed so definitively. We waited for a moment. The wait was a lot more stressful for her, given the situation. Still, nothing happened for a span of several moments. We looked to Putt Head, who looked back at us silently. I couldn't even hear any crickets. Then he spoke up. "Get your ball." Kate looked to the sand trap, and I followed her gaze right after. Something was moving under the sand. "No," Kate replied timidly. "TSK. You know what? Rules were made to be broken." "I'll give you a second shot," Putt Head said, a smile audible in his tone. "Go get your ball." The thing beneath the sand squirmed and slithered, like an arm-length worm just below the surface. Just as quickly as we had seen it, it was motionless and any sign of it disappeared. "I'm not going over there," Kate insisted. "I'll get it," I stated, still not letting go of the idea I could save her. "Oh my goodness." Putt Head walked over to the sand in a huff, leaned down, and scooped Kate's ball out in one smooth motion. "You try to be a nice guy, and they don't trust you. I swear, people just want to think the worst of each other these days." Kate tentatively held her hand out, a look of suspicion still readily apparent on her face. Putt-Head simply placed the ball in the center of her palm, then walked back to his usual position next to the green. Kate turned toward me, now in disbelief. She gave a slight smile and let out a soft chuckle. Crack. The ball broke open like an egg. A large, leech-like worm sprang out of the ball and attached to Kate's throat before she could make a sound. It was much, much too large to have been realistically contained inside the ball. A splash of blood doused her shirt as she stumbled backward, struggling against the thing as it started coiling its long body around her neck. She fell to the green, her arms splayed out limp and motionless at her sides. I just stared. "You didn't help," Putt-Head noted. His tone wasn't surprised or accusatory. It was just a flat statement. "She didn't want help," I said just as plainly. "That's crazy." That ball was apparently a horrible, evil devil worm egg the entire time. Putt-Head pointed out as he began strolling to hole 4. "What are the odds?" "Looks like it's just you and me," I noted as we stood shoulder to shoulder at the next tee. Any attempt at keeping his distance was gone now, as if I was the least threat of anyone there. That was a mistake. I couldn't tell the others. Not without risking our adversary hearing the truth. Putt-Head was so sure of himself that he went first every hole, and in doing so, showed us all the exact angle, form, and swing to score a guaranteed hole-in-one. I wanted to point it out to everyone, but it was too big a risk. Instead, I was quietly hoping they would pick up on it on their own. The most I could do was help Kate match Putt-Head's shot under the guise of the protective boyfriend physically mansplaining the game to her. "Might as well get it over with," he shrugged. He made a hole-in-one. So did I. Shot for shot, hole for hole, this is how it went for 14 more holes. Hole 7 had a giant ape-like creature standing over it, its fists alternately moving to block the hole. I was sure I could hear the foundation cracking around its huge feet, as if it was ready to charge over and pummel me into a red stain. Hole 10 was at an uphill angle, with a comically inaccurate globe at the top. It immediately brought to mind Indiana Jones and the boulder. Hole 13 had a giant tarantula and an accumulation of actual cobwebs carefully positioned and ready to catch the ball. A stream of drool dripped from between its fake jaws. As we continued, Putt-Head grew less talkative, less fun and whimsical. He was getting frustrated. He was taking shots with no flourish, no pizzazz. Every unique way to die that we passed by seemed to magnify his disappointment. It was like watching a child in timeout stare directly at the toys he wasn't allowed to play with. Still, he never missed, and in turn that gave me what I needed to match him. Putt-Head was a broken man by the time we reached the 18th hole. "Here we are," I said in a pointedly smug tone. Then, I repeated his own taunt. "Might as well get it over with." The last hole shed all semblance of subtlety. A titanic skull, complete with crossed bones, sat on the green, its jaws opening and shutting behind a short ramp. Snakes wove in and out of its eye sockets as blue flames belched from within the mouth. All the while, the skull's hollow, echoing laughter deeply resonated over the screams of 1,000 damned souls. Blood pooled around the base of the installation, and I could tell it was innocent blood. Something about the smell, I guess. All of that did nothing for me. By that point, I'd already seen too much to have any real opinion of it. "You should probably go before the blood gets in the way," I urged. Putt-Head took a slow look at me, then to the tee. Shaking his head in disapproval, disbelief, or both, he took his shot up the ramp, into the skull's mouth, out of the blood-spilling wound at the back, and straight into the cup. "You know," I continued, "I thought you'd be happy. Isn't that usually how these things go? Some creepy, eldritch loser with nothing better to do sits on his thumb in a location nobody visits. Then, someone comes by that can give them a challenge. This is the part where you're supposed to thank me for giving you the first actual challenge you've had in centuries, or something." He drew in a slow breath. "But you." One last time I lined up just like he did, drew the putter back just as far as he had, and stood exactly the same way. Despite everything that had happened, for the first time that evening, I let myself crack a proud smile. I turned to see Putt-Head standing in small booth at the end of the course. All at once, his cartoonish peppy demeanor was back. It was as if he had been acting despondent the entire time, just to appropriately rub this in my face. Congratulations. A hole in one. On hole 18. You just won a free game. I looked ahead. Hole 1 was waiting, impossible as it was, right after 18. On top of all the things Putthead's mini-golf course and arcade had done so far, it had the sheer nerve to be recursive. Part of me wanted to give up, right there. Hours had passed. Hours of shock, dread, disgust, and ultimately frigid, numb apathy. With a new bounce in his step, Putthead stepped up to the first tee and dropped his ball into place. He twirled his putter a few times, making a show of his fully renewed energy. I looked up at the sky to see no moon above us. Was time itself even moving? Yes, part of me wanted to lie down on the green, close my eyes, and just give in to any stupid fate would befall me for refusing to play. Maybe I'd be eaten by something, or dragged off, or I'd just lay there as years passed and my body skeletonized. Maybe I'd wake up and I'd be Putthead myself. Whatever. The other part of me refused to be beaten, and that part was a real bastard. Kind of boring, isn't it? I said as Putthead drew back to swing. He stopped. Boring? I think this has been anything but boring. Putthead laughed dismissively, as if I were a complete moron. The first time, I admit, I was on the edge of my seat for a while. I pushed Putthead's club back from the ball as he sized me up with his dead black hole eyes. A second time, though. Then what? When I beat you again, are we going through a third time? A fourth? We tied. Putthead noted. I ignored him and continued on. I guess if you just want to bore me to death, that's technically killing me. Putthead stepped back, visibly bristling. I had finally figured out the way to go about shaking him. The batshit freak was legitimately annoyed at being called boring. I'll beat you again. I arrogantly put my hand on Putthead's shoulder and got as much in his face as I could given its spherical nature, in the dark. I don't even need to see to win. Putthead snorted, then raised his hand. Snapping his fingers, Putthead turned out every light in the park. I know what you're doing, Putthead said, his voice slightly more imposing in the pitch blackness, where I couldn't see his silly outfit. You're going to try running away while I can't see you. It doesn't matter. The gates are still locked. I'll consider it a forfeit. I heard the sound of his putter making contact with the ball. I'm not going anywhere, I retorted. Taking my turn, I tapped the ball softly and started praying. Please, anyone or anything that might be out there. I don't care what you are. Anything that's the opposite of this golf monstrosity. Please, don't let me miss. I heard Putthead snap his fingers again. The lights flickered and sparked back to life, dim light growing and illuminating the result. My ball, a brilliant orange color, was peeking out of the cup. His ball, white and featureless and devoid of any joy, was on the green beside it. I leaned over, squinted at his ball, and put on a real show of it. Looks like you missed. Putthead was still. Scary still, as if his costume had been on a store mannequin all along. Then, the screaming started. It swelled up quietly at first, as if the scream was coming from someplace far away inside of him. It sounded like there was a pocket auditorium inside that big round head. The scream grew to ear-splitting volume as Putthead fell to his knees, arms outstretched. He began frantically beating himself in the head with his own putter, leaving dents and cracks. All the while, an uninterrupted, breathless shriek filled the park. Finally, he dug his hands into the freshly made holes and, with a powerful wrenching motion, twisted his head completely around with a resonating, wet snap. His body fell forward onto his stomach, rotated head staring up at the night sky. Well, I looked down at my demented captor as he lay there. Isn't that par for the course? The crickets started chirping again. When I looked back, toward hole 18, I instead found myself back at the normal beginning of the course. I walked back to my car, which had returned to its original spot, and looked to the open gates. On the drive out of there, away from the course, I couldn't help but grin ear to ear. It was a sick sort of grin. Something inside of me had broken, or died, or both. All I could think about was how clever I had been, goading Putthead into turning out the lights, just so I could squat down, switch our balls, and then purposefully miss on his behalf. I told the police that I dropped the gang off at the course, and then went directly home. They checked my car's GPS history, and oddly enough, the supernatural nature of the park helped me out since it appeared as if I pulled up, then left immediately. It was like the time we spent there never happened at all. They found the bodies, but nothing matched up. From what the authorities said, Kate had been shot in the throat, Aaron in the chest, John in the head, and Lissa in the abdomen. They were found behind that old supply shed, as if they had come across a drug deal or some other such illegal scenario that needed to be covered up. Testing me for gunshot residue and searching my place for any sign of weapons further vindicated me. I mean, in terms of cover-ups, it felt like the park itself was doing as much as possible to prevent too many questions from being asked. I often think about the last night I saw my friends alive, and sometimes even I would question whether or not any of it actually happened. After all, my therapist told me it didn't. She would know, right? Wrong. The next time I drove by that area, a year later, I saw them all again. Kate, Aaron, John, and Lissa, dressed in bathing suits, having a wonderful time on the new billboard sign over the recently built water park. They were all smiles as they each gave a thumbs up, similar to the one being given by the cartoon mascot at the center. A fun-loving character with an oversized beach ball for a head and two large black eyes. Beach Bob's water slide park and zip line. We still have a ball here. Story number 4. On one dark, foggy morning, a news station began the daily evening broadcast to Sevier County, a low-population area in the middle of nowhere. It began with a poppy intro song, canned footage of various county locales, and fast-forwarded time-lapses of the weather. When the intro wrapped up, the station's logo appeared briefly on the screen before taking position at the lower left corner. The screen showed footage of the Childs' home. A wide panning shot of a well-kept front yard covered in yellow caution tape and strobing with red and blue police lights. One small boy, who lived in a very poor home and had nothing better to do besides play with Legos in front of the living room TV, noticed something. "What's that?" the boy asked his mother, who sat in a recliner behind him reading a novel. The mother marked her place in the book and looked around for her glasses that were nowhere nearby, before giving up and squinting at what her son was pointing to on the TV. "What's what?" she asked. "That," the boy said, pointing to the field beyond the Childs' yard. "What is that?" "A horse field," the mother said simply. The field is a flat stretch of land next to the Childs' house with only a few salt blocks and troughs spotted around. Even through the static of the TV, wisps of fog and frosted grass are easily visible. Their neighbors had a few horses that walked around that field all day. "Not Thayet," the boy said, then pointed to a specific spot in the field. "That?" The mother shrugged, took another doomed look for her glasses, and searched the screen again. For 1 second, she thought she could see a rough shape in the mist at the far end of the yard. Before she can get a closer look, the screen goes back to the newscasters. "I'm sorry, bud. I didn't see anything." The next morning, the Sevier County News intro kicked off at 7 a.m. with the same canned footage of rolling clouds and cheaply animated logo. The newscasters wear inexpensive clothing and shuffle empty papers on their table. "Good morning, Sevier County. This is James Bergeron and Dash. Audrey Rasmussen here to give you a quick morning update before the day's scheduled programming." Kicking things off, Audrey continued, "And as you've probably noticed, a heavy fall-time fog has set in around the Sevier County area. Though fog is common this time of year, in some areas it's thick enough to stop traffic. Local meteorologist Jason Whitman, says James, has informed us that due to the cold weather and thickness of the fog, it may not dissipate until later in the week. All residents should travel with caution, including using your headlight brights and walking with reflective material. For a brief update on the ongoing investigation into the suicide of Madeline Childs, we have Kenneth Spears down for a brief interview with Richard and Evelyn Childs at Maylene Elementary. The image cuts to a young lady in a PBS Channel 3 sweater standing in front of Maylene Elementary. Behind her is a thin, tired-looking man with unkempt hair, a 5 o'clock shadow, and heavy shadows under his eyes. He lightly holds a little girl by the shoulders. The girl is the spitting image of her father, the only difference being even more pronounced shadows under her eyes. While the reporter is very well lit by the news camera's huge lights, the two behind her are almost shapes in the darkness until the light is swung towards them. Only one child in the county is watching the live report, a young girl home with a bad cold. Why are they doing this? She thinks as she bundles into her blankets and pillows and watches the TV in her room. That girl looks so sad. Kenna Spears, on her 4th day of what she thought was going to be a fun and exciting internship, starts her report. "Good morning, Sevier County," Kenna Spears says, smiling a wide smile that looks extremely out of place. The fog is so thick that the world outside of the intensely bright camera light seems to be entirely an inky purple. The only outlier is a row of classroom windows behind Richard and Evelyn filled with dim light, but even those are so distant and non-penetrating to the fog that they look like phantom gaslights. "I'm here with Richard and Evelyn Childs," Kenna says before slowly walking with the camera towards the two. Husband and daughter of Madeline Childs. Richard winces. Evelyn frowns. Kenna either doesn't notice or doesn't care. Dropping to one knee, she speaks to Evelyn while holding a large microphone close to the child's face. "Evelyn, how are you doing?" she asks with a wide smile still on her face from what could only be a very warped sense of professionalism. "All this fog is pretty creepy, right? What a day to come back to school." Evelyn smiles a little and nods. Richard rubs her shoulder lightly. "We just wanted to say that we're glad to see you doing well," Kenna says after an awkward pause. She's about to say more before Evelyn abruptly turns to her father, hugs him, and runs towards the school. The sick girl bundled in blankets at home smiles, happy that the girl got away. Kenna Spears frowns, resets her faux broadcast smile, and approaches Richard for an interview that the county sheriff had been very adamant to him that he make. Kenna is about to speak when a loud, shrill scream cuts her off. In the footage, those few who happen to be watching see Evelyn running back to her father. The sick girl at home begins to scream as she sees what Evelyn is running from. "It's her." Evelyn screams, over and over. "It's her. It's her. It's here." Richard picks up Evelyn and moves toward the camera's light. It's the only thing even moderately bright and easily visible around. Kenna Spears freezes, too confused and inexperienced to do anything more than stand and stare at where Evelyn had run from. All she, the cameraman, and Richard can see is a vague outline of the school. Except a silhouette in the fog? The adults stare dumbfounded while Evelyn and the sick girl at home scream. "What is?" the reporter asks. She approached the silhouette. Before she could get close, the form in the fog abruptly moved, the mist quickly billowing towards Kenna, before the reporter was lifted off of the ground. Kenna's thoughts were not coherent. All she could be aware of were what felt like fingers as cold as ice around her throat. The pressure tightened harder and harder, until she could feel an explosion of pain, blood, and collapsing trachea in her throat. There's a flash of unbearably intense pain. Then Kenna is on the ground. People are screaming and running. The one light in the fog topples over and the camera crumples. Both the footage and the light cut off and everything is dark. Kenna barely notices. She's trying desperately to take breaths through a shattered throat. She feels her chest soak in a warm liquid and wonders what it could be. The cameraman appears, yelling, trying to tell her something as he hovers over her, looking terrified into their surroundings. Something was surrounding them, but all Kenna could see was fog. Before she can see what the cameraman is looking for, Kenna Spears loses consciousness and dies on the 4th day of her exciting new internship. The cameraman does not notice. At the moment of her death, the same icy cold fingers wrap around his throat and drag him, kicking but unable to scream, deeper into the fog. In the next few hours, the entire town of Maylene went into lockdown. A few bodies belonging to those unlucky enough to be outside of their homes and around the school that morning, including the sheriff of Maylene and his 2 deputies who had been keeping a close eye on Richard, are unseen in the dense fog. The attack had taken place early enough in the morning so that only 20 or so children were at Maylene Elementary. They had all been quickly evacuated to the library. They'd all waited, but help didn't come. Richard Childs was alone in an empty classroom while Evelyn waited in the library. The room offered no comfort. The minuscule desks and chairs looked odd with the brightness of the lights and the darkness outside. Colorful stickers of various objects with cartoonish eyes seemed to glare at him. Sitting in the teacher's chair and putting his head on the desk, he did his best to ignore everything else and draw 5 pointed stars on a blank piece of paper. Except all that he saw was Madeline. He wanted to be in the library, wanted to be with his daughter, but it was better this way. Better to be here alone than to stress out the kids old enough to recognize the man on the news who had abused his now-deceased wife. Or was she? The thought kept coming back to him. That's what Evelyn had said. It had been her. His mind had already been strained for years. He thought it had snapped after he found Madeline's body sitting against the tree in the front yard, smiling spitefully even in death. "Everything's gonna be okay," he'd told Evelyn as they both sat in their house waiting for the cops to arrive. It was a paper-thin platitude, and they'd both known it. He said it again when the sheriff led him to the squad car. The pitying look Evelyn had given him as he was handcuffed made him want to rip his hair out and scream, "To hell with the news cameras and reporters watching." Those promises, the lies, had caught up to him. As he stared into the shifting darkness outside of the classroom window, it made a sort of karmic sense. The lies had replayed in his head since he'd been interviewed by the sheriff. "I love you" had been the first. He'd said it after his and Madeline's first kiss. She'd been expecting it, after all, wouldn't want to disappoint his first love. She'd told the same lie to him every time the fighting had died down, and they lay on the bed or couch. Sometimes she'd even cry to show him how remorseful she felt after treating him the way she did, promising she'd get help and start treating him better. But after Evelyn had been born, Madeline had gotten physical. Richard picked himself up, wiping his puffy eyes with the back of one hand and putting the pencil he'd been doodling with in the other, and left the classroom, deciding that he didn't care how others thought of him. He wanted to be near Evelyn. The stepping of his shoes echoed around him as he walked towards the library. The lights were off, the dark brick hallways seeming out of a nightmare. What if those things, made it into the school? But that was impossible. He and the teachers had made sure there was no getting into the building. Right. Even that much was assuming anything about this situation was logical. At the library door window, he could see that most of the children were collected on a large rug that displayed Earth's continents. A few teachers sat on chairs around the kids, forming a protective circle. Kids and adults watched a tape of Schoolhouse Rock. There were stickers everywhere of flowers, rainbows, and books with large cartoonish eyes that looked haunting in the dim TV glow. Evelyn was at the back with the older kids, and she was the first to see him. "Dad," she said, so loud and abruptly that everyone in the room jumped. She was up and running across the room, everyone watching her in stunned silence. She threw open the door and hugged his waist. "Are you doing okay?" he asked, kneeling down to be eye to eye with his daughter. "Not really," she said with heartbreaking exhaustion. "Are you?" "Yeah," he said, hoping it was true. "Miss Clausen wants to talk to you," Evelyn said, pointing to the teachers sitting at a table in the corner of the room. "Okay, sweetie, sit tight." He wasn't sure which one was Clausen at first, until he saw the oldest woman sitting at the far end of a long rectangular table with a particularly harsh glare aimed right at him. She motioned for him to join the teachers at the table. Each of the teachers gave him varying degrees of caution as he found a seat. Some just seemed cautious, most looked outright hostile. Doing his best to ignore them, he sat down and stared at the table, not knowing what to do with himself. He felt all of their eyes boring into him. "Mr. Childs?" asked Ms. Clausen quietly, easily the oldest teacher at the table. She was a beady-eyed and permanently scowling woman that Richard could tell kept as tight a grip on her classroom as she could. "Yes." He did his best to smile, but only barely managed to soften his frown. "Did you kill your wife?" For an instant he was back in the sheriff's tiny interrogation room, the deputies crammed uncomfortably behind the sheriff's desk, all three looking like they'd pulled in a psycho-murderer after a rampage. They'd put him in a small chair against the far wall and made sure to constantly let him know that, no matter what it looked like, he had been free to leave at any time. "No." The teachers all glanced at each other, as if a bit surprised the homicidal maniac they'd built in their heads could speak. He supposed this was fair. He hadn't spoken to any of them when they'd been making sure the school's doors were locked. "Did you beat her?" Another teacher, this one a man in his late 30s, asked very timidly before remembering that he was supposed to be acting as an adult parental figure before less timidly adding. "The news said there were bruises, Dad." "Bruises on her wrists and shins," Richard finished. "She left a lot more bruises on my gut and back from the effort, I promise." "Why was that?" Clausen asked. He could feel the tendons on his neck stretch as he bit his tongue, anger flooding into his veins as he remembered everything Madeline had done. The anger wasn't even towards the teachers or the sheriff and his deputies when they had asked, it was towards himself. "She liked to fight," he said when he'd relaxed himself. Clausen held her gaze. Care to explain what you mean, Mr. Childs? No. The teachers all shared shocked glances. This whole thing was starting to prickle his nerves. Look, he said. I just wanted to make sure everyone was all right. I sure as hell didn't come here to get interrogated again, Mr. Childs, Clausen said, her face softening just enough to show Richard that behind the gruff, stern exterior was an old woman who was desperately tired and scared for the children in the room. We just want to make sure you aren't a risk to the children. It was clear that some of the teachers, specifically the prissy young man who'd spoken up earlier, still weren't convinced that he wasn't a threat. That was fine with Richard. He didn't give a shit what they thought. That only leaves me with one question, Mr. Childs, Noreen said, rubbing her eyes. Do you have any idea what in the Sam Hill is going on? No, he answered honestly. It was still hard to believe anything that had happened was real, but he'd seen the reporter's throat bulge as something lifted her from the ground. And what Evelyn had said. It's her. My daughter says she saw it, he said. Whatever did that to the reporter? She said the thing looked like her mother. I believe her. Stunned silence. That's insane, the young male teacher said. You're insane, Mr. Benson, whispered Mrs. Clausen, so sharp and so loud that most of the kids glanced toward the adults at the table. Mr. Benson squirmed into his chair. Richard had thought Clausen's eyes had been beady and penetrating before. Now they were sharp enough to make the most behaved college senior wither. You forget, she continued, much more quietly, that I saw the murder happen myself. That before the murder happened, some of the kids were talking about adults walking around the school that none of the teachers could see. Do you doubt me? No, Noreen, Benson stammered. I just don't think it's logical to Benson, Clausen said. You said you were the only one to see what happened to the cameraman. Is that still true? Benson went pale, so pale that Richard thought that all of the blood might have drained out of his face. Putting that aside, Clausen said very pointedly towards Benson, who shrank even farther back into his chair, we need to find a way to contact the authorities. It's clear they Richard felt something at the very edge of his senses. A feeling. The others at the table must have heard it as well. They'd all gone quiet and pale with quizzical looks on their faces. Richard turned in his seat to get eyes on Evelyn. She was looking towards the windows. All of the children were. The light of the TV cast shadows around their faces as they looked, as if wearing dark masks to hide their terrified expressions. Ghosts, an older child near Richard whispered. Like white statues. The younger children began to cry. Outside, several shapes had begun to move through the fog towards the windows. The mist clung so tightly as they moved that a myriad of human silhouettes could be intuited. At the front, moving very fast and energetically between the windows and foggy figures, was Madeline. Richard didn't know how he was sure. Maybe the wisps trailing her figure in the fog was just distinct enough for him to tell the shape of her. Regardless, he was sure. That was her. Mom. Evelyn. She stood next to him, looking at the figures. The animated figure stopped, and Richard thought he could see its head move toward the sound of Evelyn's voice. Why? Evelyn asked. A puzzled look. Not only from Evelyn, but also from some of the kids nearer to the windows. That doesn't make sense, Evelyn said. I thought you said . Evelyn reached towards the glass as she spoke. Richard was about to stop her when the windows exploded. Everyone in the room screamed. Richard threw himself in front of Evelyn, tried to tell her to run. Warm fingers closed around his throat, cutting off his words. The teachers rushed to push the kids against the furthest wall in the library. The kids were still screaming so loud that Richard couldn't hear himself think. From his right, Clausen and Benson ran to him, throwing their weight into whatever held Richard. Both crashed into the invisible figure like a wall, the grip around Richard only getting tighter. At one point, he saw Benson jab at the thing with a very sharp pencil. It exploded uselessly. A few of the other teachers fell onto the invisible thing choking him, but each of their blows bounced off. Richard remembered his own pencil that he'd put in his pocket earlier from his time in the other room, collecting himself. To hell with it, he thought. Even if it was a useless effort, he wasn't going down without a fight. Not anymore. He gripped the pencil so hard it almost snapped and stabbed it towards the fingers on his throat. The pencil hit its mark and went deep. Cold, unseeable liquid spilled over his hands. Before he could go for another hit, his vision went crazy and his body went weightless. The back half of his body slammed into something hard, knocking what little air was in him out of his lungs. No. When his vision had just barely begun to refocus, he saw something fly out of the windows that had just been broken into. Evelyn screamed as she was pulled into the fog and out of sight. The other figures in the fog followed, all floating silently while the sound of Evelyn's scream faded. The shortest walk to where Evelyn's screaming had trailed off, the teacher's parking lot, was through the combination auditorium/gymnasium. The exit was one he'd locked himself when they'd been sweeping the school when this all started. Why didn't Madeline come through, then? She easily could have if she was powerful enough to shatter the library windows. Was this all a part of her game? Her amusement? Had she purposefully given time for him and everyone else to be terrified and at her mercy before she took him to hell with her? It was likely, he realized as he found the exit and took his first step out into the fog. Even when they'd been kids, she'd lauded any sort of victory she could over him. Back then it had all been in good fun. Hadn't it? The mist crawled through the dark doorway behind him. The air was cool, damp, and had an odd metallic taste to it. The drizzle that had been over the town for days was gone, but it had left a very wide, very thin pool of water that covered the entire lot. He couldn't see all of it, but what he could reflected the mist into a gray mirror that lay flat across the lot. His feet almost seemed to be stepping into a void of mist that rippled at his every move. Richard felt he should be scared, but he wasn't. Not at first. His instinct to get his daughter back overwrote everything else. It only waved when he saw feet-shaped holes in the water at the very edge of his limited vision. There was a quick motion, more ripples on the water, and then the feet were facing away from him. He could see the black tar-like surface of the lot under the feet-shaped holes. Fear was in him then, rushing back into him as he encountered more and more foot shapes in the water. Whenever any came even slightly into his limited visibility, there would be a quick motion that sent cascades of ripples across the mirror he seemed to stand on, and then the feet would be pointing away from him. There was Evelyn, standing rigid and silent as far off in the fog as he could see. Splash. Splash, splash, splash. Something slammed into his back. His vision blurred as his body fell forward and slammed into the ground, his head and stomach slamming hard into the pavement. The air in his lungs was squeezed out of him. Instinctively, he tried to pull air back in, and his throat was met with gravelly rainwater. In a daze, choking and spitting, he raised himself onto his knees. The fog around him was all at once nauseating and hard to get a grip on. It felt like he was in hell. Playing with your toys. Huh, Maddie? He stood, straining his ears for the same splashes she'd caused before. It was almost impossible. Every time he turned his head, the other invisible things turned away, causing ripples and splashes that overtook any of Madeline's, if she was even making any. Splash, splash. Something slammed into his shoulder. She was in front of him now, and easy to track, but what now? She could bleed, even if it was impossible to know what she bled. But how could he get to her and Evelyn without putting his daughter in danger? A shame that our last fight would be to the death. It was probably what she'd wanted. Why she'd done whatever she had done to get an army of figures in the mist to do her bidding. Even if he was going to die, he'd hoped there was a way to be sent off flipping that bitch a middle finger. There was a humor in that he was still playing into her game. Humor. That's it. It was so simple. He laughed. It started slow, forced and horrifying in its own right. He forced a laugh anyway, all of his chuckles almost sounding like sobs. A memory came to him, the looks Madeline had given whenever he went out with co-workers without her permission. The annoyed glances when Evelyn had chosen to be with her father instead of her mother. Even the frown he would see on Maddie's face whenever he found good company, away from her, at family parties. The fake, horrible chuckles started to come out easier. Boy, I tell you, Richard said to himself, if I took my wife to a dog show, I think she'd win first prize. Now he was really laughing. So hard that he thought he wouldn't be able to get air back into his lungs if he tried. There was nothing to laugh at before, but now there was. Whatever the white things were, whatever Madeline had done to bring her and them here, was a fickle, easily manipulated thing that was not only beyond Richard and Evelyn's understanding, but of Madeline's as well. Dad? Evelyn asked, her fear entirely overshadowed by her shock. She was about to say something else when her eyes went wide. She looked around where the ghosts stood in the water. On the other side of the school, Noreen Clausen was finally getting a connection to the police station on her cell phone. Benson was nearby standing with the other teachers in front of the kids, all of whom had been packed into the corner like it was a standard school lockdown. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a few of the kids look towards the windows. None of the figures in the mist had followed them to the room, but Benson's nerves still froze. "What is it?" he asked. "People laughing," one of them said. Benson strained his ears. He heard nothing, but at the very end of his senses, for just a second, he thought he could feel something. Richard couldn't hear laughter besides his own, but like Benson had, he felt them. All of the other white things that had come for him with Maddie, they were laughing with him. Straight ahead of him, two of the footholes turned towards him. Madeline. He watched her take a few steps around the other invisible things, all of who were still facing away from Richard as they laughed. He could picture her looking at what she thought had been her allies, or even just her temporary companions, with bewildered rage. In one last deliciously petty move, he put one hand to his straining stomach and the other pointed at her. By then, he was laughing harder than he ever had in his life. Suddenly, the footsteps were thundering towards him. Every step was heavy and clumsy, spraying water all over the place. A lot of the water hit the invisible white things, and rivulets of water ran down them, giving them shape. His laughter stopped. Richard's hand went to his pocket and back out just in time for his late wife to make contact. The choice for weapons in a school library had been almost non-existent, and why his attack had hurt her when nothing else would remain a mystery to him forever, but it was all he had. 3 sharpened pencils. Again the pencil sank in, and he felt the cold liquid run down his fingers again for an instant before the full weight of her crashed into him, sending them both crashing into the ground. He tried to breathe in, and almost did, before a force that could only have been Madeline constricted and pushed on his entire body. "I'm going to die." A part of him was ready to die. That part of him wanted nothing more than to let something that he'd continued to ignore and, in a way, foster, just let him rest. Let him finally be done with everything. "Dad." Seeing black spots in his vision, he brought his hands from their awkward angle underneath his back and wrapped them around Madeline's invisible form. "Get," he said, his hands gripping her head. "The hell," he stood, lifting both of their weights off of the ground, slowly and struggling but surely. Out, he took the second pencil from his pocket and hammered it into the invisible form's throat. It disappeared into her, all the way up to the eraser. "Of my life." With one last effort, he threw her away. Madeline's body hit the ground hard, making a crater the shape of her body in the water. The other foot-shaped craters in the water turned towards Madeline. Madeline raised her arm, the water instantly pooling into the empty space as she lifted it. It fell back in with one last pathetic splash. Evelyn ran into him then, wrapping her arms around and burying her face in his jacket. She was crying too, but quietly, keeping her eyes just dry enough to watch her mother leave for the final time. It happened very quickly. One moment the body-shaped crater was there, then it wasn't, filled with the reflective rainwater that still covered the lot and still filled with dozens of white things, all pointed towards Richard and Evelyn. Then, without a word or sign of any kind, the figures in the water turned away from them and the school, and left. Their steps were silent, and their ripples were many. The image of their craters forming in the water as they walked away and into the fog was one that never left Richard or Evelyn. Story number 5. It was supposed to be another boring Tuesday. It wasn't late enough in the week to start looking forward to the weekend, but late enough to already feel like I was done with the week. My head felt like it was going to explode from the mind-numbing monotony of work. I'd been staring at the same column of numbers on my computer for what felt like hours, my mind wandering in desperate search of something, anything, to break up my day. I really have to find another job, I reminded myself strictly. I had been telling myself that for years though, but had never managed to make the move. I told myself it was just me being lazy. But deep down, I think I was scared of change, of moving into the unknown. As much as I hated my job, maybe my next one would be worse. I leaned over to my coworker, Alice, and whispered, Hey, Al, what did you got for me? Alice and I had an agreement that when each of us got super bored, we'd share an interesting bit of news or office gossip. The most recent offerings had been things like, the red panda born at the zoo was named Ralph. Strange lights were seen flying over Cincinnati, Lima, Vancouver, Cape Town, and Ouagadougou. And Phoebe, from Human Resources, won $11 on a scratch ticket, bought another ticket with those winnings, and then won $5,000 so is taking her new boyfriend on a trip to New Zealand. As you can see, really anything to prod the mind into staying alive. We were able to chuck back names we thought would have been better than Ralph. Alice liked Buster, or Boots, while I preferred Bartholomew and Atticus. And we shared our jealousy for Phoebe's lottery win and griped over never being able to travel anywhere interesting. Alice leaned in close. I've got something good. A serial killer just escaped from a high-security prison, she whispered. No one knows where he is, but people think he's nearby. My heart stilled for a moment, then I laughed it off. That's not true, is it? Alice nodded. It's all over the news. Name's Sable Graves. Sable Graves? Oh. You're for sure making that up, I said. When have I ever made up one of my stories, Clara? Prodded Alice. I rolled my eyes. Tons of times, I said. Okay, fair enough, she said. Sometimes I don't have real interesting stories to share. But this one is true, I swear. And interesting, right? Look it up. I turned back to my computer and opened a browser. I typed in SABL. But then I stopped, because I noticed things on my desk were vibrating, shaking, clattering. I gripped my mug of coffee tightly to stop it sloshing all over my keyboard. Earthquake. Someone yelled out. Memories from primary school earthquake drills pounced on me, forcing me to dive without thinking under my desk. Is this what we're supposed to do? I wondered, simultaneously remembering something else about standing in door frames. The office continued shaking, but not in a rocking violent way. It was more a deep vibration. I held my breath, waiting to see if the tremors would build. And I prayed. I wouldn't say I'm a religious person, but in crisis, I do find myself reaching out. I've always had the sense that there is something greater out there. And I figured it never hurt to ask, right? So I prayed, please, don't let it be a bad earthquake. The tremors continued steadily. Almost too steady, I found myself thinking. Then a strange humming began, deep and unnatural. But then suddenly it switched to a horrible high pitch. I covered my ears with my hands and screamed. Maybe I thought my voice could somehow muffle the sound. Or maybe I just plain terrified. Without warning, a blinding white light blasted through the windows, engulfing everything in its glow. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up, face flat on the floor. I pushed myself up, trying to shake haziness from my eyes. I slowly pulled myself to standing, finding my body was aching as if I'd been thrown into a wall. I peered around, trying to see if everyone else was okay. It was then I realized I wasn't in the office anymore. I was in a house. What looked like living room. One I didn't recognize at all. My heart pounded heavily in my chest. The thumping felt deafening in the still silence of the room. I stumbled over to the door. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't move. I was locked in. I had the sense that something was dreadfully wrong before this, but now I knew for sure. You have to get out of here. My brain screamed at me. Find a way out. Find a way out. I scanned the room. There were no other doors, just that one. But a large window stretched across one of the walls. I rushed over to see if I could get out that way. The window was covered by a heavy-looking curtain. I tried to swipe it aside, but it wouldn't move. My brain still wasn't working well yet. It took me a couple seconds to realize that the curtain wasn't inside the room. It was on the outside of the window. Why is there a curtain on the outside? I wondered. It made no sense. But nothing really made sense to me at this point. I felt around the window for a latch, an opening, anything. But there was no way to open the window. Find a way out. My brain shouted at me again. I looked around the room for something I could use to break the window. There wasn't much in it. A simple couch, a bed in the corner, a table with a few mismatched chairs around it, a desk with a computer and papers scattered about. I picked up one of the chairs and hurled it at the window. It bounced back, not even making a crack. I tried again, wham, but nothing again. I felt the glass again. I realized it didn't really feel like glass. More like a sort of plastic, but it was slippery, almost like it was coated in something. I pounded on it. It felt thick, unmoving. My heart plummeted into my stomach with dread. I knew there was no way I was going to be able to break it. I knew I was trapped. A tidal wave of fear crashed over me. Tears poured down my face. I let myself cry, wail, for about 3 minutes. But then I told myself, no. Stop. Pull yourself together. You're never going to get out of here if you fall to pieces. Stay sharp. Stay smart. I wiped the tears from my face and took several huge breaths to calm myself. Then I switched into my logical brain. Look around, I told myself. Maybe something here will tell you where you are. I scanned the room again, trying to take in details of the room this time. I realized there weren't a lot of details. Something about this felt really off. The room didn't feel lived in. It felt too simple. Sanitized. I went to touch the couch. I found it wasn't soft. It was made of something solid, hard. Like a sort of plaster molded into what looked like a couch. I went to the computer desk. Getting close, I realized the computer also wasn't a normal computer. It too seemed to be crafted of this plaster substance. The papers scattered around had strange symbols on it. And picking them up, I realized they weren't paper, but some sort of extremely thin metal. Nothing I was taking in could I make any sense of. Hello. I called out. No one answered. Hello. I shouted as loudly as I could. Is anyone there? I waited, listening. Silence. But then I heard something. A dull scraping sound. My head whipped around to look to where it was coming from. A small panel in the wall was sliding aside, revealing a small opening. I ran over to it. Hello. I shouted. Who are you? A tray with a sandwich on it came through the opening. Then the panel swiftly slid closed. Wait. I shouted. Please, who are you? What's going on? Hello. I want out of here. No amount of shouting or pleading made a difference. No one answered me. I tried to pry the panel back open, but it was impossible. I looked down at the sandwich on the tray, and I realized it wasn't actually a sandwich. I poked it. It was some sort of gelatinous substance shaped and vaguely colored as a sandwich. Was it even edible? Maybe it was poisonous. There was no way for me to know. I pushed the tray away. I suddenly noticed the curtain on the window was moving. It was opening. I ran over to it to watch as the curtain was drawn back. I don't know what I expected to see on the other side, but it definitely wasn't what I saw. I saw a long, dimly lit hallway stretching from left to right. It was gleamingly clean. The hallway was lined with other curtains, all which were moving aside to reveal windows, like mine. The window directly across from mine was the only one I could get a good look inside of. It was filled with vines, twisting and reaching toward the ceiling. Puffs of blue mist ejected from tubes into the room every few seconds. I saw a couple small creatures scurry along the vines. They looked a bit like monkeys, but instead of being covered in fur, they had shiny blue scales on them. One of them stopped and looked directly at me. It blinked its little eyes at me, then pulled something from a pouch in its belly. A perfectly round little pearl. It held it up to me, as if showing it off. Then it pushed it back into its belly pouch and darted off to its companion. I was only just starting to try to comprehend what was in front of my eyes when a door at the end of the hallway caught my eye. It was opening. Then something emerged. Spindly legs reached into the hall, bringing a multi-eyed creature closer and closer to me. A gigantic spider. I was paralyzed, my body firmly disobeying my mind's forceful instructions to run and hide. The spider came closer, its eyes trained on my window. For some reason, I guess my body figured if I could just remain still, it wouldn't see me. Stupid. The spider came up to the window. I felt its eyes taking me in, scanning my entire body meticulously. Its gaze was so intense I felt it could see parts of me I didn't even realize were there. A wrinkle at the corner of my eye, a scar on my hand picked up in childhood long since forgotten. Maybe it could even see right into me. See the blood pulsing through my veins. See my lungs screaming for air as I held my breath. Frozen in fear, I had no choice but to look straight at it. My first impression had been that it was a gigantic spider, but I realized it wasn't quite a spider. Its legs didn't look organic. They had more of a metallic look to them than the hairy body that sat on top. The creature had numerous amber-colored eyes, circling its head like a beady crown. Its mouth held sharp fangs framed by what looked a sort of mandibles. One of the mandibles stretched out to my window, almost like a protractable arm with delicate finger-like tentacles at the end. The tentacles caressed the window. I remained frozen, unable to move. I could feel beads of sweat begin to line my brow. Eventually, the creature slid its tentacles off the window and disappeared down the hall. That's when I lost all use of my limbs. I collapsed to the floor, shaking mercilessly. Questions swirled in my brain. What was that thing? Where in the world am I? Why am I here? Is that thing going to hurt me? Is it going to eat me? I hurled everything that was in my stomach onto the floor. A pool of liquid acid was left splayed out in front of me. Then I heard a loud knock on the wall at the back of the room. The lights pulsed in my enclosure. Then a large panel slid open, and 2 spider creatures came through. They were coming right for me. I screamed, grabbing a chair, readying myself for a fight to the death. I swung the chair in front of me and shouted, "Get away from me!" But they kept coming. It was just seconds before I felt the sting in my side. The creature's spindly leg had moved so swiftly I had barely saw it coming. But a point on its end had stabbed me in the side. My body was immediately overtaken by a flood of warmth. I'm going to die now, I told myself. This is how it ends. A haziness overtook me. I realized I felt at peace. I'm okay with dying, I thought, as long as I stay this comfortable. The chair dropped from my hands. I sank softly to the floor, onto my knees, and I watched as the spiders cleaned up my vomit from the floor. Then they departed. The opening in the wall slid closed and I was alone again. Maybe I've been dreaming this whole time, I thought, as my brain floated in haziness. When I wake up, I'll be back home, in my own bed, hugging my teddy bear. But then I felt my mind begin to grow sharp again. I felt myself regain control of my body. I clutched my hands to my head. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I realized I had probably just been drugged when I was stabbed by that spider. Then other questions began to tumble through my mind. Are those spider things real? Maybe this is a movie set or something. Is this some kind of weird experiment? Am I being filmed? Maybe this is some sort of twisted reality show. I pulled myself up, driven by this new mission of mine, find the hidden cameras. There must be a camera. I told myself. This must be a show. Again, stupid, but that honestly made more sense to me than anything else I could comprehend at the time. I reasoned that lifelike robots, designed for some ethically questionable reality show, seemed far more plausible than actual living monsters keeping me captive. I searched the entire room, but I couldn't find any cameras. Just plain walls. This infuriated me. If I had found a camera, at least things would begin to make sense. But nothing made sense. I found my fear transferring into red-hot rage. I beat the walls with my fists and screamed. Then I heard a click, click, click. I looked back to the window and nearly jumped out of my skin. Many more of those spider things had arrived at my window. They gathered around, peering at me. One extremely large one was tapping on my window. Click, click, click. Then I saw a swarm of tiny spiders scuttle up on top of that large one. Their beady little eyes all stared at me with something that almost looked like curiosity. Were these children? I wondered. The scene looked almost familiar in a strange way. Like families looking at Ralph, the red panda, in the realization hit me at once like a gut punch, and my memory flashed to what Alice had told me about strange lights seen over cities. I thought about the unnatural vibrations, the humming, the intense flood of light. And I realized all this time I had been wondering, where in the world am I? When I should have been wondering, where in the universe am I? My enclosure, everything, it all made sense now. I was in a zoo. An alien zoo asterisk. Asterisk. I had no idea what to do with this information. Emotions like fear and despair and helplessness and anger all swirled together inside me, eventually hardening into a solid rock of spite. I leaped behind the couch and hid. I didn't want any of them to have the satisfaction of looking at me. I curled up into a ball, away from the curious, beady eyes. Eventually, I fell asleep. I awoke to a knock on the wall. It was the same sound I had heard before my alien captors had entered to clean up my vomit. And the lights pulsed just like they did the time before. I scrambled to the edge of the room, staying far away from the wall I knew was about to open. I didn't want to get stung again. I watched the back wall slide open. Sure enough, 2 aliens came through into my enclosure. This time, I tried harder to see what was beyond them, where they were coming from, if there was any route for escape. But it looked like they were emerging from a large plane box. I wondered if maybe they had to step into another enclosure before entering mine, to prevent the escape I had been hoping for. But then I realized, if I'm in space, or on some alien planet, where am I escaping to? Even if I was able to get out of this enclosure, I wouldn't be able to just flee home, would I? I thought of the puffs of blue mist in the enclosure across from mine, and wondered if maybe my air was specially treated for me too. Would the air outside even be breathable for me? I wondered. I saw that the aliens were pulling something with them. A platform that hovered just over the floor. On it was something which I couldn't quite see as their bodies were obstructing my view. They carefully rolled whatever it was off the platform, then left. That's when I finally saw what it was. A human. My heart leapt, knowing I wasn't alone. Getting closer, I saw it was a man. But he wasn't moving. His eyes were closed. "Hello," I said. He didn't respond. I kneeled by his side and saw that he was breathing. I remembered myself waking up earlier, disoriented, in that very same place. He must be drugged, I thought. I looked at him more carefully. He looked to be about my age, mid-20s, dark hair, with a clean-cut look and a strong, tall build. I'd probably think he was attractive if I was attracted to guys. I shook his shoulder. It took a couple minutes, but finally I saw his eyes flutter. "Hello," I shouted. "Are you okay?" The man opened his eyes. They were a mix of blue-green-gray, like a stormy ocean. "Where am I?" he asked, groggily. I wasn't sure how to respond, having only just come up with an answer to that question myself. And I found myself too scared to say it out loud. I knew it would sound crazy, and I didn't want to rattle the poor fellow. Not right away, anyhow. Let him settle a bit first, I told myself. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Clara," I told him. "Clara, it's really nice to meet you." He looked up at me and smiled, his eyes twinkling with charisma. I wondered if he was still under the haziness of the drug. He didn't seem as freaked out as I had expected him to be. "What do you remember?" I asked him. "I mean, do you remember what happened before you woke up?" His smile dropped. I could see him racking his brain for memories. "Where am I?" he asked again, as he slowly pulled himself up, taking in the room around him. Then he swore mightily. "This is a prison, isn't it?" he yelled. He stumbled to his feet and circled the room, feeling all the walls. "I am." "Do you remember a light?" I asked. "A light," the man said, confused, as he continued his scan of the enclosure. The window curtain was now closed, so he couldn't see into the hall beyond. The man seemed to be feeling the walls for weaknesses. He hit a button I hadn't even realized was there. A wide-rimmed bucket popped out of the wall. "That'll be the toilet, I guess," he said, reaching down into it as far as he could before pushing it back into the wall with frustration. I felt suddenly embarrassed that I had been here longer than him, and he already seemed to be finding out more about the room than I had. "But if this is a prison," he said, turning to give me a long look, Why are you in here too? He walked right at me, eyes coldly locked on mine. I found myself retreating until I hit the corner of the room. You're not in uniform, he said. So you're not a guard, are you? I shook my head. I think we're in a zoo, I blurted out. An alien zoo. In space. If he thought I was crazy, his face didn't show it. His expression didn't change at all. He continued staring at me with calculating eyes. Do you remember the news stories? I asked him. About those strange lights in the sky? I don't read the news, he said. Okay, well, the words flooded out of me in a garbled mess. There were these strange lights seen in the sky, all over the world, Vancouver, Ouagadougou. I didn't think much of them before, not until I was taken. I think we've been taken. Before I woke up here, I remember vibrating, strange sound of humming, and a blast of light. Do you remember a light like that? I think we've been taken by aliens. I'm not crazy, I swear. I've seen them. The aliens. They brought you in here, and they watch us from that window over there. When the curtain is open, you can see other enclosures, with more specimens, like us. Are you calling me a specimen? He asked, his voice hard. I think we're part of their zoo exhibit, is what I mean, I said. I think you just need to see them first to really understand. I know, it's a lot to, I get it if you don't believe me. I watched as he took in this information. As he scanned the room again, I could see a memory coming to him, a look of realization settling in his face. The lights, he said. Yes, I do remember the lights. I was in the forest. I saw a group of lights high in the sky. I thought they were drones. But one came closer and closer to me. It wasn't a drone. I knew that for sure. It was something else. It was huge. It hovered right over me, above the trees. And I remember a horrible noise. And the light. Then I remember you. Here. So, you do believe me? I asked. He looked back at me, his eyes twinkling again, with that charismatic smile he first smiled at me with. Clara, I'm really good at reading people, he said. And I can tell you're an honest person. I know you wouldn't lie to me. He took my hand in his and then squeezed it. Yes, he said. I believe you. I couldn't help but smile. It felt so good, in that moment, to know I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. What's your name? I asked him. He hesitated a moment, then replied, You can call me Patrick. Nice to meet you, Patrick, I said. I'm sorry this is happening to you as well. One bed, he said. What? I asked, confused. There's only one bed, he said, gesturing to the bed at the side of the room. You think they want us to, be a couple? What? No, I said, moving away. There's a couch too. I can sleep there, it's fine. You can sleep wherever you'd like, darling, he said with his twinkly-eyed smile. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Something about his smile was beginning to creep me out. I went to sit on the couch. I watched as he picked up the tray with the gelatinous sandwich. This supposed to be food? He asked me. I shrugged. He took a large bite out of it. Aren't you afraid it may be poisonous? I asked him. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead, don't you think? He said, munching. It's not that bad, actually. Want to try some? I shook my head, figuring it would be better to wait and see how his stomach dealt with it. It wasn't long before the curtain opened again. I watched as Patrick approached the window and looked into the other enclosure. He waved to the little monkey creatures across from us. It's showing me something from its pouch. What is it? He asked. The little pearl? I replied. He nodded. It seems very proud of it. I think it may be an egg. Whoa. He was now looking down the hall. When you said aliens, I was picturing little gray men, he told me. He appeared shocked, but not really scared. He watched more in curiosity as a pair of the spider creatures approached our window. One extended its mandible out to the glass. Patrick reached his hand out to meet it. Then he laughed. This is amazing, he said. If I have to be kept in a cage, At least it's an interesting one. Of course it doesn't hurt that I've got a pretty girl with me for company. He shot me another smile. I should tell you, I said, I'm not interested in guys. Never have been. The lives we lived before, he said, they don't matter. Here, this is all that matters now. Our entire world now exists within these walls. What are you trying to say? I asked, point blank. That I think you'll learn to like me, he said with a confidence that made my skin crawl. I watched him look back to the window. Oh, come, you gotta see this, he said. The egg, it's hatching. I saw the spiders retreat from our window, so decided to go take a look. I went and saw the spiders were now watching the little money creatures. The two were both holding the little pearl, which was splitting into pieces. It was an egg, because inside was a little baby monkey. The spiders clicked their legs on the glass of the enclosure. The parent monkeys held up their child proudly. I bet they want us to have kids too, Patrick said, looking at me with a grin. That won't be happening, I told him. I think you should choose a new name, he said. Why would I do that? I asked. I think you'll have an easier time adapting to our new reality if you leave your old life behind, he explained. Then I remembered his hesitation when I had asked what his name was. Is your name really Patrick? I asked. Yes, he said with a smile. It is now. What was your name before, though? I asked. I told you, before doesn't matter, he said. It matters to me, I said. He just smiled at me, then walked away. I watched as he picked up things around the room, examining them. He rifled through the papers at the desk. He picked one up and felt the edge of it. He pressed his finger along the corner, slicing his skin open. Sharp, he said, sucking the blood away with his mouth. He then started to fold the sheet. I always liked the name Rosemary, he said. I think that's what I'll call you. My name is Clara, I said. Now it's Rosemary, he said. How would you like it if I just picked a name for you? I asked. Like, now your name is. For some reason my mind blanked for all male names. But one name jumped to mind. Sable, I said. Hearing that name, he turned quickly to me, his eyes flashing with what looked like rage. I knew immediately I had made a huge mistake. You will call me Patrick, he said in a calm but ice-cold tone. My heart was thumping painfully in my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was going to pass out. I knew why the name Sable had jumped to my mind. It's the name I had been typing into my computer when the office had started shaking. Sable Graves. I hadn't had time to see what he looked like. Why don't you like the name Sable? I asked quietly, afraid to know the answer. I think you know why, he said. Don't you, Rosemary? I looked to the sheet that Patrick, or Sable Graves, was folding and now saw that it now was in the shape of a knife. Maybe Sable is a name from your past that you'd like to leave behind? I whispered. He nodded, his expression remaining stony. Okay, I said. I understand, Patrick. He smiled at me, but the twinkle didn't reach his eyes this time. He pushed his newly made knife into his pocket. I watched him closely as he wandered back to the window. He gazed out of it, watching the little monkeys in the enclosure across from us. They're a cute little family, aren't they? He said. I nodded. Rosemary, my darling, he asked. Can I ask you a question? Sure, I said. What do you think would happen if one of us died? He asked. Do you think they would go back to Earth? Pick us up a new partner? I felt like the wind had been knocked from me. He turned to me, patiently waiting to hear my response. I don't know, was all I was able to squeak out. I think they would, he said. Not that I think either of us will die. He added with a laugh. Not if we live harmoniously together, like that little family over there. I'm tired. Let's go to bed, my darling. I'll sleep on the couch, I said. Rosemary, my darling, he said softly. I think you'll be more comfortable in the bed. The couch is fine, I said firmly. His eyes turned cold again. Come to bed, Rosemary, he said. I'm not tired yet, I told him. He started walking towards me. The look on his face terrified me. I grabbed a chair and held it in front of me. "Stay away from me," I shouted. But he pulled out the knife from his pocket. "If you don't want to be a family, that's fine," he said. "They'll find me someone who will." I don't remember much from after this. I know he tried to stab me, and I know I got the knife from him. And there was blood. A lot of blood. Then there were spiders coming at us. Then the sting. I woke up, my face flat on the floor. It took me a minute to realize that it wasn't the cold, hard ground of the enclosure. It was grass, and I could feel the warmth of the sun shining down on me. I pulled myself up. I found I was in the middle of a field. I started walking. I walked and walked, having no idea where I was. Eventually, I came to a farmhouse. There was a woman there with her kids. She helped me. She told me I was in Missouri. I'd never been to Missouri in my life. The woman phoned 911. I chose not to tell anyone the true story. I didn't think I would be believed. But I think people deserve to know the truth about what's out there.